All right, Alexander, let's talk about what's going on in Ukraine. We've had the Biden op-ed in the New York Times, what America will do and will not do in Ukraine. Obviously, it wasn't written by Biden, but it's significant that he put his name to it. And I guess it lays out a certain strategy, and you may want to discuss what that strategy is. And we have within that document we have the discussion with regards to the delivery of these HIMARS and more javelins and other ammunition to Ukraine, which is going to be supposedly what Zelensky and his regime may call a game changer. But what Biden admits in his essay is a way to prolong the war, perhaps get Russia to the negotiating table because they realize that the only solution is a diplomatic solution, and what may be seen as a way to either inflict pain on Russia or to not inflict pain on Russia, but to get to some sort of negotiated settlement because these weapons kind of bog the Russians down. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to look at that essay, and of course, you have constant progress on the ground by the Russians. You're getting more and more retreats, it seems, from the east, from the Donbass, and it's just looking really, really bad for the Ukraine military. Kharkiv, I believe now is another offensive on the north. We're starting to see the Russians preparing for something. Slavyansk is now, you know, ahead of them. And I believe, my personal opinion is that with Slavyansk, the Donbass this phase two part of this conflict is over. I think Slavyansk is the key. That's just how my view of things. And this whole Kherson offensive by Ukraine was a no start.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. It didn't do anything. So a lot of different things going on.
Exactly. Well, let's just. I think you've summarised the military situation very well. I'm not going to repeat what you've just said. I mean, Severodonetsk apparently is now essentially under Russian control. There's just some factory areas which they've got to clear, but they've captured Severodonetsk. They captured it very fast, and you're quite right. They got Slavyansk in their crosshairs. They're now coming very close to Slavyansk. If Slavyansk falls, if Kramatorsk, which is the other part of the Slavyansk-Kramatorsk conurbation, falls, then in Donbass it is game over. The Ukrainian counteroffensive in Kharkiv that we were hearing so much about has gone into total reverse. The Russian military seems to be approaching Kharkiv again, and it's once more within shelling range. And Ukraine still claims advances in Kherson, but the video evidence tells a completely different story, as do the reports on the ground, that this is very much like the great Kharkiv offensive that we were hearing so much about. It's more a PR maneuver, it seems, than a real event. So I'm not going to say more about the military situation because I think you've covered it very well. But let's get to, firstly, these arms deliveries. Now, we're going to get 4 of these HIMARS multiple rocket launchers from the United States. There's word that Britain and Germany are also going to add 4 each. So we're going to get 12. Now, these are not the really advanced systems that we've been hearing so much about that can, launch pinpoint strikes over distances of 300 kilometers. The range is said to be around 70 kilometers. Now, that's about the same range as equivalent Russian systems. And by the way, and contrary to what people are claiming, those Russian systems, it seems, are at least as precise as the American HIMARS systems are. Now, even if you accept that these 12 systems that are going to be sent to Ukraine are probably only the start of more, and Jacob Dreisen at the Dreisen Report has given a very interesting video explaining that there are insuperable logistical difficulties about supplying, keeping large numbers of these things operating. because they use up so much ammunition so quickly. But even if you assume that there's going to be more, these are not going to change the situation in Ukraine in any significant way. And there was something about this latest US arms delivery which really stood out for me, because bear in mind, the HIMARS are only part of it. There's other US weapons being delivered. No more M777 howitzers, and only 15,000 rounds of ammunition for those howitzers. Now, 15,000 may sound like a lot, but in battlefield conditions, it's nothing. I mean, bear in mind that according to the BBC, the Russians launched 1,500 rounds of ammunition on one small Ukrainian town in Donbass over the course of a single day. 15,000 rounds of ammunition gets you nowhere. The Russians are using around 400,000 to 500,000 rounds of ammunition in Donbass every day. Now that suggests that the US has now quietly accepted that the tube artillery, the howitzers, have failed in Ukraine, and that's why they've moved on to these multiple launch systems. But they're not going to be the great game changer that everybody expects. So the question is, why is the US supplying them? Why is the US continuing to supply weapons? What is going on? What is the game plan now? Now, I read Biden's op-ed, just as you did, and a number of things came across to me. Firstly, you can't trust much of what is there. I think that's the first thing to say. I mean, let's talk about the HIMARS. We were told that, there's been ongoing debate in the US, which hadn't been resolved even as of Friday. And in fact, the reality is the decision had been made weeks ago, and the first of these things has already arrived in Poland. So you can already see that there's a great deal of deception about this. But when you actually read that op-ed, the thing that really struck me about it was how much more moderate the tone was. I mean, it even referred to Putin as Mr. Putin. And we're no longer talking about victory. We're talking about improving Ukraine's position in negotiations. Now, I can't help but think that we're not even any longer in the game of weakening Russia, because Russia obviously is not being weakened. What we're in the game of trying to do is what we discussed in that program the other day, trying to keep this war going for as long as possible, trying to perhaps extract some territorial gains somewhere, Kherson perhaps, Kharkiv before, so as to try to find an off-ramp and to try to keep this thing going or hold it together until we've got the midterms out of the way. So in other words, the administration is now, not everybody in the administration, but some people in the administration, the Treasury, the people who are in charge of the Democratic Party's electoral machine, they're trying to find some kind of off-ramp. They're still up against the hardliners, the neocons. Bloomberg says that the White House team, that the people in the White House and in the State Department still want to escalate. They want more sanctions. There's a healthy debate going on about this. Healthy debate means almost certainly, I mean, I'm guessing now, but I'm sure this is true, a furious row. But it looks, on the strength of what I read in this op-ed, that it is the more moderate, if you like, the more reasonable people who, for the moment, are winning out. You can't assume anything in this. It's quite possible that the hardliners will find some means of getting this thing back under control, that they want to escalate further. But at the moment, the balance has tipped ever so slightly towards, if you like, the more rational faction.
Right. So the neocons, they want to escalate, but there's another faction that would just like to delay this till the midterms, but they still want to keep the war going. I mean,
Oh no.
Biden mentions diplomacy, but it still seems that both factions in the Biden administration, they want to prolong this war. It's just that one faction would like to prolong it with escalation. The other faction, it seems like they just kind of want to keep it
Yeah.
steady. I mean,
Yes. Yeah. They want to contain it.
no
They
one
don't
wants
want
to end this.
Yeah, nobody
Contain
wants
it.
to
They
end
want to
this.
contain it,
No,
yeah.
they want to contain it. They don't want to escalate. They don't want to send missiles that can launch deep into Russia, which might result in the Russians retaliating, which is what I suspect some of the hardliners probably wanted and lobbied for. So they don't want to end the war now because they don't want another debacle on their hands in the run up to the midterms. So they're trying to put Ukraine in a stronger position. They're sending some weapons there. They're egging Ukraine on and to carry out these offensives in Kherson region. One in Kharkov failed. They're looking for some way to keep this thing going, to keep Ukraine going, to keep the war going until after the midterms, or until they can find some way to reframe the whole discussion in the run up to the midterms to avoid the appearance of failure, which might be fatal for the Democratic Party's electoral prospects, what's left of them. So that's, I think, the debate. It's not about Ukraine, helping Ukraine. It's not about ending the war. It's not about, the various considerations we've discussed about these in these programs. It's about how to limit the political damage from something that hasn't turned out as expected.
And Zelensky has to stage manage this, and then the
Yeah.
EU has to go along with this.
Absolutely, because of course, when it comes to the electoral prospects, those obviously are far more important than anything else. I mean, it's debatable, by the way, whether people like Ursula in Europe or indeed Zelensky in Kiev have been briefed about this or really understand fully what's going on. Well, maybe Zelensky does. Maybe there are people who are, in his entourage who come across him as pretty clever, and oligarchs and people like that, maybe they understand it. I don't think anybody in the European Commission has understood it. And as for the British, they're far too distracted now with an escalating political crisis in London, where there are more and more Conservative MPs now coming out saying that Boris Johnson should go, for the British really to think this thing through and to understand exactly what's going on. But I really increasingly getting the sense that there are more and more people in Washington who are saying this has already done enough damage and the point has come where it's got to stop.
It sounds to me like we're heading for another type of Afghanistan foreign policy debacle for the Biden White House. I mean,
Well, yes, but
November is way out there with regards to this conflict.
yeah, I mean, bear in
I
mind
just don't see how I don't see how they're going to keep these balls in the air. That's my point.
Yeah. Well, as I said, remember, for these people, it's framing the narrative that is more important than actually any particular outcome. Because it's provided they can come up with something that they can sell to their supporters in the country as some kind of success, or if not a success, provided they can say, well, we would have succeeded, but for what the bad Republicans under Donald Trump's leadership did. Provided they can do that, I think they'll be satisfied. They'll feel that they've contained the problem. And, these people are very skilled at doing that sort of thing. But ultimately, we are now in damage limitation. This isn't working out. The sanctions war is not succeeding. And the war, the actual war, the real war, the one that's being fought on the battlefields, well, that's not going the way Ukraine Rather, they expected or hoped it would go either. So that's where we are, I think.
Wouldn't it be better for the Biden White House to just get the entire mainstream media to just get on board and stop talking about this and just memory hold this and then dump this on the Europeans? I mean, I know
Very,
some people will say, well, then the Europeans are going to lose trust in America and all that. No, I don't think so. I think the
well,
Europeans are such lapdogs. The EU and the UK, I don't buy any of that. The only way they're going to stop dealing with the U.S. is if Trump wins in 2024. When I mean dealing, the only way they're going to sour on the U.S. is if Trump becomes president. And other than that, I think the U.S. can pretty much do anything they want with the European Union. So, I mean,
no,
wouldn't a better strategy be for the Biden White House to just kind of say, just stop talking about Ukraine. We're pulling out of this and just
yeah,
dump it on the EU, and we're going to move on to other narratives, just other
absolutely.
stories.
Absolutely, but remember that we're all only talking about what a faction, which is at the moment only very tentatively in the ascendant, wants. I mean, the more rational faction, as I call it. But they're not the only people in Washington. They're not the only people in the administration. There are still the hardliners there who want to escalate. There's also the hardliners in Congress, people like Lindsey Graham, for example, and people like, you can easily imagine if they just pull the rug under this whole thing and dump it all onto the European Union. Well, people like Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell and Mike Romney might have things to say about that. And not just them. Even some people in the Democratic Party might have some things to say about that. So you've got to try to keep this thing under some kind of control, because the internal battles in Washington itself are very far from being resolved. They're still arguing about this. So the kind of strategy that you've outlined is one which a united administration, cynically looking at the situation, not just cynically, but realistically looking at the situation, saying, well, we failed in Ukraine. I mean, it hasn't turned out. Let's call an end to this affair. Let's dump all the problem on the European Union. You're absolutely right, by the way. The Europeans will take anything they're given. So we don't need to worry about them complaining. There might be a few people in the British Parliament who are unhappy, but who cares realistically about them? And, we could just move on, and, our friends in the media will do exactly what you said. They'll simply stop talking about this. So the rational people, they would probably adopt that policy. The trouble is, they're not so much in control that they can do it at the moment. And the president himself, I can't help but think that he goes along with whoever speaks to him last. So he could change from one day to the next quite easily, and he's still constitutionally the key decision maker.
Yeah, and I mean, Russia's not going to stop doing what they're doing. They're going to continue to carry out their objectives. So I mean, it's a no-win situation for the Biden White House. The EU is already just committing suicide. I mean, that's
Yes,
a done deal at
yes,
this point in time.
yes.
So the best thing they could do, I'm just trying to analyze all their options. The best thing they could do is just forget about it. I mean, like literally, just memory hold the thing, and the media
Yes.
will play along. And I even think, like Fox News, with the exception of Tucker Carlson, even Fox News will play along because,
Oh, absolutely.
everyone's pretty much been aligned with war, with the Putin bad, Russia bad, war escalation narrative. So even
Absolutely.
Fox News, I think, may even play along with Biden White House, just so they don't have to admit that they completely called this war completely wrong. So I think a lot of people will just prefer to just nothing to see here. Let's
Yeah,
move on to the next thing.
let's move on to the next thing. Let's talk about China. Let's talk about the Middle East. Let's talk about Iran. Let's talk about anything except Ukraine. I completely agree. Except, as I said, that there is this core of people in the White House, in the National Security Council, in the State Department, who believe in the policy. They still want to use Ukraine to damage Russia. And of course, from their point of view, even if, I'm assuming too much when they say that they believe in the policy, what they don't want is to lose face and or power, not within the country, because I don't think they care very much what people across the United States think about them, but within the administration and the power structures in Washington itself. And that's what they're worried about. That's always what they're worried about. So they don't want to seem like the advocates of something which failed. And that's why there is this battle going on, and it's far from decided. I'm actually going to make a particularly, my own personal guess. I think that the more reasonable people, the more rational people, may be in the ascendant at the moment. But if anything changes on the battlefields, if Slavyansk and Kramatorsk fall, if there's more advances by the Russian military into perhaps central Ukraine, if Zaporozhye or Kharkiv get threatened, or alternatively, if the Ukraine is able to pull off some territorial gain in Kherson region, which I don't expect, but anything's possible. You could very easily see the pendulum swinging back, and the hardliners will say, look, the Russians are intent on devouring Ukraine. We can't back off now. If Ukraine falls, the US will be humiliated. So let's not just send 12 HIMARS, let's send 200, and let's do what we can to get to turn this thing round. And I think that's possible. But consider, only 12 HIMARS have been sent, of which only 4 are being supplied by the United States. A big reduction in the howitzers, all that seems to have been abandoned. Only 15,000 rounds of ammunition. No Polish intervention. I mean, remember we had all that talk about it? It hasn't yet happened. And the crisis in Moldova, in Transnistria, which seemed to be brewing, somebody has stamped on that and put a stop to it. So at the moment, it does seem to me as if the moderates, if you like, are in the ascendant, but it cannot be relied upon. The op-ed seems to be, and the way I read it, is it seems to be an attempt by the moderates to get a statement in writing from the president which will contain the hardliners. But in Washington, nothing can ever be relied on, and the hardliners are still there, and they're still strong, and they're still there in the White House, in the National Security Council, and in the State Department, and in many, many of the Washington think tanks. So this is not played out at all. It's not so resolved. It's not finished. We will probably see more arguments going on in Washington right through the summer.
All right, we will leave it there, everybody. theduran.locals.com, and go to the Duran shop. Get 10% off when you use the code GOODDAY. Take care.